Hi, Raquel. Good evening, and hello, everyone. Welcome. We have a very exciting lineup tonight. A total of four panelists. So I'm just going to share with you their bio information, then we'll lead it off. Ebony will then move forward. So Ebony Kenney is a design and communications professional with a market research background and over 20 years in the industry. Her MA of design is from the University of Baltimore, and she's a lead software product designer working in teams as a usability analyst for a federal government agency for the last 6 years. Very interesting, very exciting. She draws her insight from a keen understanding of the scientific method and uses the skill set in her designer approach. And she thinks of her contribution is like a strong Wi-Fi signal. And if you follow her on Instagram, you will understand what that means. She's been sharing with us lots of short meme videos lately. So that's really interesting. Joseph Carter Brown, over 20 years in the profession. He's a passionate designer, an open collaborator, and thoughtful leader focused on community and organizational transformation. He currently serves as the senior design lead for the Think Company, leading a team of user experience designers, researchers, and strategists. With an emphasis on collaboration, Joe helps shape the way internal teams work together to bring about streamlined user-centered design and development process. And I think that is a major theme tonight, exploring the UX, UI, or thinking about UX and UI in a variety of ways. Keith Rich, Keith and Joe work together at Think Company. He considers himself a midfielder. So that's, of course, a football reference. His cross-discipline skills allow him to bridge gaps along the spectrum of design, primarily between design and development. In his when he's in his element, he's prototyping new ideas and is driven to create experiences and connections that makes everyone's lives better. And lastly, Nicole Fall, an arts educator and also an artist. And her career in education is highly diverse. She's a founding teacher of foundation sculpture and printmaking at George Washington Carver Center for the Arts of Technology. She's also a community arts program director for Baltimore Clayworks, and she has helped implement a satellite site in an urban law and manage two school arts classes to up to 42 sites in the metropolitan Baltimore area. Nicole is was an associate professor and coordinator of visual performing and communication arts at Baltimore City Community College between 2004 and 2012. And she brings a lot of educational expertise to our conversation tonight. So welcome, Nicole. And Ebony, it's off to you, all yours.
All right, thanks everyone for joining us. I'm gonna go ahead and start a presentation. And I just wanna say at the top, I'm gonna give you a brief presentation. I promise not to over talk, and then we're gonna go into our panel discussion. And I just want you to engage. I might be asking questions and like asking for your examples and things of different things we're talking about. And I would want you to engage in the chat, ask questions. If we don't stop to ask them, then we'll answer them at the end. So this talk is called Safe Third Spaces. And what we're here to talk about is equity. We're here to talk about the age of equity that is here and forthcoming. So one thing I want to start right at the top and do is my working definition, and other panelists may share their definitions of equity, is to value something that hasn't been recognized as highly valuable yet. So a lot of times you'll hear an equality definition kind of wrapped into this equity definition. And I want to say as a baseline for the things that I'm going to be talking about, that's my definition. It means that you are either realizing value in someone else or they are realizing value in themselves that hasn't been widely recognized that way. So starting off at the top and looking at some of the recent pieces of artwork that has, seeing some of the costs and the value of recent pieces of artwork. You see over here, Diddy, or I think he's Love now, paid $21 million for it, and a piece of artwork here. And it's okay, trying to minimize that. All right, by Carrie James Marshall. Then we see here, okay. Then we see here a piece of artwork, which if you've watched the show Good Times by Ernie Barnes, that went for 15 million. And of course, the Basquiat went for 110 million. And so when we have this conversation, what we're beginning to ask is, what is the cost, or how is the cost and the value of art and design for the purposes of this conversation, how is it determined? And there's a shift happening. And so first question I'm going to ask, and I'm asking for you to chime in and engage. You can use the chat. When you see this symbol here, what are some of the characteristics that come to mind? So what's the first thing that comes to mind when you see this?
Ebony, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
It's only me, but I'm not seeing the sign, the icon.
Oh, okay. Is anyone?
I think you might be on the wrong, you might be sharing, you're sharing your Acrobat screen, so it just is on the title slide. You might need to go to the other screen.
All right, let me stop. I decided to do full screen, and that's where I probably made a fatal flaw. Okay, let's try that again.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right. So we're still going to do it anyway. I know you saw the next slide, but we're going to see it anyway. What comes to mind when you see this symbol? And I don't know if folks are putting things in the chat, but if they are, just you can call it out. What comes to mind? Not a hard one. This is an easy one here.
Well, Starbucks.
Okay, Starbucks, right. So when you go to Starbucks, what are some of the characteristics of Starbucks? Like what comes to mind? Like what are the characteristics of the place?
They're kind of stylish.
They're stylish,
yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Is there a lot of people there, a little bit of people? What are the people doing? What kind of mood is there? So that's what I'm kind of trying to bring to mind, but I don't want to spend too much time trying to get that engagement. So, but that's what we're going for. So what I want to bring out is that Starbucks has said that for 60 million people a week, Starbucks is a safe space. So Starbucks said they had a third place policy, and they said we want our stores to be a third place, warm and welcoming environment where customers can gather and connect. And we saw that. We saw them live that out. That was in 2018. We saw where they kind of where they were met with some challenges as a result of that commitment. And we see where a lot of other organizations have kind of been met with some challenges trying to live that out. What does it look like to live that out? So just moving forward, some examples. So first, let's start with what is a third space? Okay, a third space is a hybrid. It's neither and both at the same time. So it is a space, it is a place, an organization, it is a people, a land in transition. So there are three commonly studied types of third spaces: geographical, virtual, and cultural. So an example, geographical might be when you go into a Capital One that's also a cafe, and then it's also, they also want to, have a virtual sitting area for you. So it's kind of, geographically, it's not just a bank. It's some other things as well, a nation as well. So where you have Spain that has Moorish and Roman influences, it's in transition. So we would very much think of that as being in a third space. A virtual third space, a lot of us think of social media, so Meta comes to mind. This talk right here is a virtual third space because we're kind of at a conference, kind of in a conference together, but at the same time, we're in our homes. And then a cultural third space is very much a space that is at a precipice of moving into a movement. And so the purpose of this talk is to say that we're at the age of equity, and that is the third space that we're moving to. We're moving from a very stationary place where we are maybe reflecting culture to a place where we are very much focused on the perspective of the person that is the maker in this case. So we've got two great videos to share, but I also want to make sure that we have time for a very open discussion. So I'm not going to play them, but I'll put them in the chat for you when I get done. Okay. Okay, so then I defined what is a third space. So what I would like to then go into is what is a safe third space. So if you're in UX and usability, you know that a safe space, even if you're in market research, even therapists talk about a safe space. It's a space where you can be yourself. You can be honest. There's no penalties. There's also no perks, where it's a place where you can just be yourself and be open and vulnerable. So you can put some emojis, raise your hand, smiley faces, if you can value and respect what it means to be in and have and create a safe space. So then a safe third space is what we go on to create when we talk about building virtual worlds or building spaces that are as we are in transition, the end result being a place that is safe, a person can be themselves, but it is also something that's new. I don't know what it is I don't know what it is before I get there. So the characteristics of it is that there will be a high amount of vulnerability. There will be a high sense of belongingness for everyone. And there's a sense of justice that's in this space. So when we talk about what's happening in the virtual world, a lot of the facial recognition software, for example, an MIT student discovered that facial recognition software, when it was first released, wasn't recognizing dark skin tones with the same level of accuracy that it was recognizing whiter skin tones. And so they did some research, and then they let the company know about it, the company that was behind the research. And it has been an ongoing effort. But at the same time, the company made the changes and shifts that were necessary in order to make the accuracy the same, no matter who the facial recognition was really recognizing. So I know all of this is a little bit abstract. As I talk a little bit more and we get into the discussion, I think it will become more clear. I just wanted to introduce that if you're building a new space, a new world, if it's virtual, or a new world, let's say this firehouse is now a restaurant. So you're building something new that's hybrid. Don't let it just tolerate people. We've kind of moved beyond a place where we're tolerating people. We're moving to a place where we want people to belong. And as the designers, as the usability experts in the room, we are at the helm. We are the ones driving the bus. We're sometimes writing the language. We're sometimes choosing the images. And so we have the responsibility to be thinking in the way that is, how can I increase belongingness in what it is that I'm creating? So just cooperate with these slides. Okay, so what is social justice? Many people have seen this slide that you see here. It's a common image that we've seen in and around the internet around social justice. It's very much defined by these particular rungs of a ladder that result in justice. So you have reality. That's, some people are just, this is how the world is, we just want to reflect things as they are. But in that case, what this image illustrates is that one person gets more than what's needed, while others maybe don't get anything, or they don't get what they really need. They don't even see base level. So they're trying to see over the gate. It may seem, obvious to some, may not be obvious to others. So then after we get past reality, we start to talk about equality. So we said we're going to give everyone the same thing. We're going to treat everyone the same. So for example, in the design realm, it was, we want to show every race, we want to show every disability, every other ability, we want to show every gender spectrum, everything, all on the brochure together. So we're just going to put everyone on the brochure. And so maybe, hopefully you're nodding your heads. If you've ever been asked to do that, please, put it in the chat, let us know about it. So that is sometimes an approach that you see when there is this, well, equality means we're going to show everyone, we're going to do the same, have the same approach for everyone. The problem is that, as you see in this illustration, some people still are not able to get what is needed, or still not able to have the same sense of belongingness. And I like to talk about this in terms of having a sense of belongingness instead of need, because need feels like someone needs something from me, or someone needs something from somewhere else. And sense of belongingness feels more like something that we can all approach without moving outside of what might be their comfort zone. So then we get to equity, and equity is a place where everyone gets what they need. And if you look at it, okay, this person is maybe seems to be accommodated more, or maybe there's more of this image on a brochure, or maybe we're going with this vendor a bit more than we're going with other vendors. But in the end, you do have this sense of justice that comes out of the actions and the choices that you make. And so what the sense of justice is that in the end, the gate was removed. And so that's just to say that what is the barrier that we were trying to look over in the first place? And that's just one way to solve it. Removing the gate is just one way to solve it. It says, why don't we fix society? And so that's a big thing to be trying to do. But in this case, that's just an example of how it was solved. So let's dig a little deeper into equity. In this illustration, you probably have seen this before as well. In this illustration, you see a lot of people trying to ride a bike. The same bike doesn't work for everyone. In the second example, you see that they've made bikes for the different people that are in that need to ride. And so this is the need conversation. Let's give people what they need. Let's make this for this type of person and that for this type of person. What I did was went in and looked at, well, equity through the definition that I gave earlier, which is to value something that hasn't been recognized as valuable. It's to show that the woman that's in the bike in the back, for example, she can see a wider viewpoint, and she's in the back. So she has actually a vantage point that allows her to see the rest of the crew. Maybe the tall guy, he can see a higher level, so he can kind of see past the traffic and for a further distance. And what that is to say is that when you're putting together an agile team, or when you're putting together a design team, a designer and a writer, to choose people based on a perspective that they have, that they are not necessarily something that you saw on their resume, but choosing them for an innate ability that they have based on the perspective just because of who they are. And that's when we really start to lean into, who is this person? Who are they as an individual? Not that they are like me, and that's why I understand them, but they are themselves uniquely, and they have this ability because of who they are, and this is going to make them strong in this particular way because of that. So that's just an example of a way that we can begin to think about equity in a way that helps us as we're makers. So in this case, I was able to take a very basic user experience process, which is define the finite, what's the budget, what's the timeline, how many people are on the project. And then you do contextual research, which is you're going to go out and kind of get in context with people and understand what is their life like when they need to do this, when they need to fill out this application, when they need to launch this app. Then you go back and create, you test it, and you kind of assess what we found out from our testing and come away with some findings. If you're in an agile environment, you're going to rinse and repeat. If you're in waterfall, you're over the waterfall. So you're going to start over from the beginning. And so what happens is that kind of realize that the rungs of the social justice ladder line up very well with those stages of the usability process. So when we're defining the finite, that's very much the reality stage. Well, what is the reality that we all need to see and accept? And a way to move yourself toward justice, or move your agency, or move your organization, move your client towards justice, is to follow these steps of the usability process. So the contextual research, the reason why we do it, if you know it, put it in the chat, is because we want to find out the pain points. You guys know pain points, right? So the pain points, and pain points isn't just for web environments, it's also for graphic design. And we always want to know what are the pain points of any ergonomic or interaction that someone might be having. And that's where we learn a sense of empathy for what that person may be going through. Wow, that was really painful for them. That had a very high cognitive load for them. I didn't even realize that when I was, behind my desk creating this page. So then you create, and when you create, you're creating a sense of equality. You're not saying, oh, I'm going to create this for someone who needs it, who's kind of less than, or I'm going going to give this to someone who needs it, you're seeing eye to eye with this person because you generated the empathy back there. So now you're eye to eye with them and you're like, if this was my life, this is what I would need. And you begin to create from a different place there. So sometimes what we do is create, we listen to the pain point and then we kind of create as if it were us right now unchanged. And so the shift right here and the opportunity is to begin to create as if we were that person, not as if we were that person who became ourselves, you know, who maybe took our path in our career, went to school or worked at this agency or had this particular experience, but just exactly as they are, to accept them. And that's the opportunity to actually see them instead of trying to make them into ourselves. So then we test, and that's where we get the sense of equity. You know, what is the value of this thing that I've created for them? Does it improve their quality of life? And then again, we assess what happened and we look at our findings, and that's, did I do this person a sense of justice? So they line up very well. An example of this, very easy examples, if you're creating something, very often you might, let's say you're creating an ad, you might decide, I'm going to create this for a bus loop, or I'm going to create it for a billboard. And so you begin to think of this user along their journey, and it is when they're in the car or when they're on the way to somewhere. Well, what if you're dealing with a user who doesn't have a car? What if you're dealing with a user who, you know, maybe they're in an emotional state where they're not going anywhere, or maybe they have a handicap where they aren't going to be able to ride the bus. So that's just a small example of where we require people are at a particular status quo in order for them to interact with our content. And that we're actually moving to a place, the age of equity, where there's going to be way more transparency. And we want to give a person a sense of belongingness at every stage along their journey, not just where they meet the status quo, when they're on the driveway, on the bus, you know, or when they are riding down the highway. So these are conversations to open up with clients and open up with our agencies, but I hope that gives you a strong example. If that resonates with you, let me know. I can't see the chat, but when I will, when I can, I'll read it. So we're kind of winding down to get into our panel discussion and open up questions and things that came up for you. And we also have some points that we would like to discover as well. But just to highlight, there are some potential problems that we need to mitigate. So for example, there might be some resistance to equity conversations at your agency, at your design shop, with your client. There might be just some resistance, like, you know, and so how can you mitigate that? Well, you might provide entry points, you know, baby steps. You might make sure that you create even a safe space for them, because a lot of times people have questions and thoughts about this, but they feel maybe they can't offer it. And so how can I create an entry point for them? And being forgiving is a very important first step for that, for the space of the conversation where you're beginning to open things up. Other problems might be rebuilding trust. Some people may just say, I'm not coming to the table. I'm not going to do business with these people. I'm not going to work with this type of imagery or this type of client. And so how can you mitigate that? Hope and persistence. So there's some other examples on this screen. I'm not going to read through all of them, but it is a chance for us. Let us not think that if we're thinking and moving into the age of equity, that we aren't going to have to mitigate some of the things that may come up. There will certainly be challenges, and we will need to kind of think a different way in order to resolve them. All right, so just some kind of current world examples. A lot of, because of this shift and this, you know, age of equity and this sort of, we're hearing that everyone doesn't have a high sense of belongingness. So how can we create that in the world? An example is Target's Black History collection. This is an example of it here, where they created, you know, clothing, kids clothing, some adult clothing with African-American greats or, you know, historical figures on them, maybe some imagery that reflects BIPOCs, and that's Black, Indigenous, people of color. This isn't just a race conversation, though. It is really the conversation for us all to look at, what is my unique point of view? And we all have a unique point of view. We actually all of the same people that are meeting at We Are All Alike or Look at How I Am Like You, we meet just on the other side at Look at How Unique We All Are. Everyone can come. Some other example you may be familiar with, Hallmark's mahogany card line. So there's very much this commitment to focusing on this particular public, and maybe there is a payday for them there. So let's move into our panel discussion. We have Joseph Carter Brown, Nicole Fall, and Keith Rich joining us. And I don't know if questions have come up. I haven't stopped, but I wanted to make sure we had time for a long discussion. So I'm going to pause and actually ask if there were any questions that came up from what was said, and then we can kind of go into what we had planned in terms of our panel discussion.
Ebony, no questions yet. I'll pop in when they're asked. Okay.
I'm surprised. Okay. All right.
I mean, we have some nice chat going on, sharing lots of examples, but not so far so good. Your definitions are excellent.
Okay, great. Okay, so we started out talking about the kind of stages that people may have when going into a work environment or working with a new client, working in a new agency, or maybe even having been there. And there starts out very often with this proving stage, and this stage of, I need to prove myself. I need to prove that I belong here. And it happens, like I said, across the board for many different people in many different aspects. So what are some of the essential aspects of that stage? If the panel could kind of chime in and talk about what are some things that you see that are just pretty much their characteristic of the proving stage.
I would chime in and say it's unfortunate, but the idea of code switching is something that, because a lot of companies are proposing that you fit in to their structure that's already established as a company, a lot of times people are kind of fitting into that box that a company has defined. But yeah, I think more and more the conversation is changing that, yeah, as you said, you can come as you are, express yourself in any way that you're looking to do that. It doesn't have to align to a professional, standard necessarily. And that's, I think, where the new age of equity is kind of coming into place, and letting people know that, you can be yourself and belong here without having to adhere to any kind of standards there.
Keith, can I just follow up there? That's such an interesting comment. So I guess I guess I want to be kind of cynical here. Have you experienced that truth? I mean, institutions, corporations truthfully being come as you are, or do you think code switching is still what's expected?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wouldn't say expected. It's just kind of almost a survival tactic. I mean, you're in a new place and you're kind of filling it out, and yeah, people are at first saying, this is our culture. We've hired you or kind of brought you in as kind of you're fitting within our culture. So in your mind, you're just thinking at the outset of like, oh, well, I will kind of fill it out and see how people are, presenting themselves in the space. What is professional defined as? Are people wearing suits, for example? That's one pretty clear example of, are you coming to work with a shirt and tie or not? It really just reflects the culture of the company. And so, yeah, if that's, yeah.
Cool. And this is another question, follow-up question for you, and obviously the panelists. I mean, have there been opportunities where you successfully brought code switching to the attention of managers and executives, and had an exchange that was informative and explaining things that perhaps hadn't been considered?
I don't think, yeah, it doesn't usually come up because it is like a taboo thing, and I think it's hard to also like communicate if people haven't had that lived experience of being, in the spot to have to code switch. So I think that's the tough thing, is like getting people to understand the different lived experiences and really understanding at the core level of like, well, I can empathize, I can see why you would have to do that, whereas other people are considered a norm and then hence don't have to code switch as often or in certain ways.
Lori,
you.
if I can actually kind of jump in on that and add to that, I think that there's an element too of, you know, getting along that is almost expected in some environments. You know, you get hired to be a, you know, there's a lot of conversation around the culture fit. And it's like, okay, well, this is our culture. We're really XYZ. So they're almost, will sometimes be this creation of the expectation of norms that you will just align with. So I think to Keith's point, and I don't want to speak for you, Keith, so let me know if I'm taking liberties with what you just said, but there is this element of the expectation that you won't rock any boat. You know, like you're not gonna fall out of line with the way other people act. You know, you're gonna fall into the norm of the system of the company, and you know, you'll just kind of get in there, you know. And that's sometimes the element of the code switching that I've seen, whether it's either aligning really heavily to jargon, you know, and understanding very tech nerdy UX language sometimes, where it's like, oh, you don't understand that term. How do you not understand? You know, so you almost feel this pressure to just fit as opposed to just exist as you are in a space, and you have to kind of have to fit into the model of what they expect, of what is expected of you to be in that space. And I don't know if I'm, again, taking liberties with what you're saying, Keith, but that's something that I feel like I've observed at times.
Definitely, that's spot on. Yeah, it is. It's usually not like a conscious thing. It just happens naturally. To your point, it just is. That's part of the culture there, and kind of the way of navigating corporate space.
I'm wondering if Nicole has a comment here with regards to educational spaces, and is that kind of, you know, the code, or kind of following the line that everyone has to remain in agreement and we're not allowed to challenge things, or you know, again, I'm wondering, has there been an opportunity for any of us, and certainly people in the audience, where perhaps it's, you know, the safe third space actually occurred, right? Was actually made as a result of the conversation, and sharing with someone that you're uncomfortable. I have an example, a recent example, but yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, from the point of view of teaching, and being a teacher and a professor in an arts environment, I felt what happened automatically with me, because I've also given a lot of thought to how I'm approaching teaching, is to make it so that students feel comfortable enough to express themselves through the techniques that I'm teaching them. And I think it really takes a lot of work to create an environment where people will express themselves without fear of some kind of comment, or, you know, when you're talking about teaching teenagers or young people, there's a lot of fear there of not being accepted. And I think really good teachers work hard at creating that environment where students are feel comfortable enough to take risks, because that's how they're going to get ahead. That's how they're going to succeed, is to learn to take risks. Another comment I'd like to make is, my daughter works for Google, and an instance where and they work on teams, she was told to be more aggressive and more participatory. And then when she did that, they called her on the carpet about it during her evaluation and told her she was being too aggressive. So, you know, that's every corporation has their culture, and it's a game. You have to learn how to play.
Thank you, Nicole. Brooke, you posted in the chat around always being the minority. You're welcome. I'm interested in that point of view, what you might want to share vocally with us. I think, Raquel, you can perhaps turn her mic on. I'm interested in what you might want to share with us. Brooke, is that possible?
Sure. Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Yes, thank you.
Oh, you were cut out for a while there. I couldn't hear what you were saying right after you said that your daughter worked at Google. So sorry about that. And it just cut right back on when you asked me to unmute myself. So sorry I didn't hear that piece. But I can
Oh, Brooke,
I feel like,
you're
especially when you ask if people, if they, tell their manager, I don't think it's a sense of I don't think it's a thing where you tell your manager. It's kind of like a sense of survival in the workplace.
Hey,
Especially
Brooke,
for
you're
my
coming in
manager.
kind of
And
low. I
made
don't know
a
if you can
comment
hear
where I
us.
said that it's especially something that I feel and see and have even done myself in workspaces where I'm like always the minority, and I have to kind of, I guess, create my own safe space in a sense. So like Ebony was talking about, like creating, you kind of have to kind of create your own safe space to work inside of the space, if that makes sense. I hope I'm explaining it in the best way.
you.
But
Thank you.
that's how it feels.
Okay, Brooke, that's great. Your voice is very low. I'm wondering if you could pump up your volume a little bit. Oh, you can't.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
I'll chat.
I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say, I could kind of hear a little bit of what Brooke was saying in terms of, and I definitely think that her point and their point about, just kind of sometimes having to create that space is actually a really good one. I can say for my own examples of previous places I've worked, the importance to create that space is hard. It's really scary. But I do think that, to her point of being kind of the only minority, I remember, and Lori, you kind of touched on it prior to us starting this call, but a company that I worked for, I remember there was this moment where I was one of the only Black people in this company, and I realized that they would do a number of things that I didn't see as kind of ethically correct. And I would sit in meetings and you have all these people who didn't say anything. And, I would speak up and I would say, well, this doesn't seem right. And you'd have all these other people go, yeah, that's actually not right. And I remember getting really frustrated because after a while I would go in and I would tell my girlfriend, I'm like, I feel like I'm the moral compass. Like I'm the only one, like nobody says anything until if I say something, or, and if sometimes if I didn't say anything, somebody else spoke up, you might have that. And so I think that, sometimes creating that space, you almost can sometimes ostracize yourself. But to Brooke's ultimate point of creating that space, in a similar example, I worked for Stanley Black & Decker, and, there was a point where they made a major push about, diversity and equity and inclusion. And I was the global UX manager there, and I had a team of UX designers that I was leading. And I'm, to the point of disruption here on the slide that we see, I tend to be the person who wants to push the boundaries. So I'm like, okay, well, if you say that's what you are, I'm going to see how much you actually mean it. So I started, I remember having a meeting with my team, and I invited my manager to this meeting, and it was right on the heels of us all having to do this diversity and equity inclusion training. And I told my team, I was like, you know what, we're not going to spend this meeting for an hour talking about normal work stuff. I was like, let's talk about that conversation. And, I had a mix of people, Black people, white people, women, men, gay, straight, so on and so forth. And so I was, I said, let's just have this hard conversation right now. Let's talk about how each person's, identity, how you bring it to work. And we just delved into that conversation. They got to a point where, some of the guys were like, yeah, I'm a white guy, I don't know how to approach this. But it really created this space where everybody started to have a conversation. And, so in that sense of creating the space and being able to kind of just open the door, for me, it was a matter of just saying, okay, I'm just going to open it. I'm going to rip this Band-Aid off and see what the company says about it, kind of introduce these hard conversations. And even to the, and just kind of being your vulnerable self is something that I've found as it feels really cliche to say superpower, but sometimes it is that being able to kind of just live in that vulnerability that you have, to the point of, when the Derek Chauvin verdict was coming in after the George Floyd case. And I remember the news broke that it was about the verdict was about to drop. And I just remember having in my head, like, what's going to be the result? We've seen how these results have happened in the past. And I got really emotional, and it was kind of toward the close, later in the day, and I still had some work to do. And I just reached out to my team and I was like, look, this is hitting me a lot harder than I realized. It's like, you all need to check on your Black friends. I was like, I'm taking the rest of the day off. And I think that sometimes it is a matter of just creating that space. And, sometimes there's a bit of a brashness that has to be put out there of like, okay, what are you actually going to do? Like, what are you actually going to stand on? And how are you going to kind of not allow me to let me code switch, and you're going to switch your code to me? Like, let's figure that part out, and let's create that space. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that, just because I think Brooke kind of touched on that idea of creating a safe space. And I thought that was a really important statement to kind of bring into the conversation.
And Joseph, you actually said something that was a touch point for me. So when you said that people are like, the guy said, oh, I'm a white guy, I don't really know this conversation. I mean, we'd be talking about people that are neurodiverse and masking. We can be talking about the LGBTQ plus community, wherever you are. I really believe that everyone understands what it means to not be the status quo. And so that's been my personal approach to kind of, I know that you know what it means to not be the status quo. We all have some level of mask. Let's all take them off together. So if you're talking about how do you create a safe space, it's like, how do you actually help people to acknowledge that in the moment and say, it's okay. It's okay. Like, and so I appreciate bringing that out. And, when we talk about some aspects of like what it means to be trying to actually prove the opposite, not that I am unique and I want you to meet me here. I feel like some of those things we might do is always say yes. That's something that has happened to me in the past, always saying yes to everything. Always sometimes being the advocate for other people's positions or other people's concerns, because it gives you like a sense of a mission. And there's actually a good variety of things that we've done that has been about just, sometimes offering value and a time, offering like, oh, I know something about that too. I think someone talked about jargon earlier. I know something about that too, or I can talk along about that too, but not actually pushing the conversation forward. So it's possible to speak and not push the conversation forward. So I just encourage us to look at that. I wanted to add that.
I'm interested. I'm wondering if perhaps a way to create the community of the safe search space is when you start to address your audiences, right? And you have the data around pain points and those kinds of things. I guess I'm wondering, does that help to expand the conversation or help everyone understand equity, and I'm looking at my notes here, creating equality? Is that a way for us to get beyond kind of like, or, certainly move past code switching, right?
Can you repeat the question one more time for me in terms of, one
okay.
more time?
So, what I'm thinking about, Joe, and everyone is, in terms of real change, right? How might data, right? Mathematical data or even qualitative data, it doesn't, both things, helps us discuss these difficult conversations, right? And perhaps really move, I'm using the term move past code switching, right? Or where everyone is equal at the table and feeling safe. Has that occurred to anyone, or should I give an example?
I'll chime in. I'll say that I am a little bit more skeptical of data. Quite frankly, I tend to be a little bit more apprehensive to the reliance on data. I believe data is good, and I am happy when we get to use it. And I think that the UX researcher side of me wants data, but I think that it becomes such a crutch that it almost stifles conversations. So I tend to be a little bit on the other side of it, in which I want to look at how the data fails us, because often what happens is data becomes it becomes a proxy for actually having the conversation or doing the hard work. And we say, oh, well, we've got this data and it represents everything. And I think that actually, calling out that, well, a lot of times when we use data, we get into stereotypes, and my mantra when it comes to data is data should never give you questions, or I'm sorry, data should never give you answers. It should give you better questions. So when you start to take data, I want to look at it and say, what does that mean? Why does that, I don't want to take any answer, any concrete information. So I don't know if I would ever use data to answer a question, but I would use it to continually question someone's motive and continually question what are the outputs we're working for. To kind of, as Carol says in the chat, data often has bias. So in my mind, I want to call out that bias so that we can then pull back into the conversation and say, we need to focus on humans. We need to focus on people. What does that mean to a person? Not what does that mean to buckets of data and vast generalizations of people.
Beautiful. So obviously, Joe, you're calling out my biases and assumptions, which is just lovely. It also shows my age. I can't tell you, I'm a baby boomer, right? And so data was what shaped my, what shaped my sense of, well, this is proof, right? This is proof. Keith, do you want to join in here? Yeah.
Oh yeah, just thinking about like the psychological safety of that safe space. So being able to make everyone aware that, the conversation will be uncomfortable at times. So like, certain interactions and things are going to come up. So I think that's like a key thing to even starting any conversation. A lot of times it falls short of, no one wants to have the conversation because they want to avoid that uncomfortable, quote unquote, uncomfortable interaction. But I think, yeah, it kind of starts with the awareness that at some point in the conversation, it will have to be, because we all have different lived experiences. And I think that's just part of the learning of it all, which will then propel us to get to the next step, to even say like, oh, what is the next step? But first we have to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Ebony, thank you, Keith. Ebony, I'm wondering, based on your experiences leading teams and developing, design and user experiences, do you have any examples of how we discuss difficult conversations and then, of course, move past them, go to the next thing, and asking and
yeah, okay, yeah, I want to answer that, but I even had like in my head something to the data thing. I just wanted to chime in and say, create your own data. If you can, you're a creator, right? Don't put it in a box. Create your own data. Create the user base for the thing that is you're creating. So a lot of times the conversations are that in leading teams, and you're up against a project manager and some people that have business knowledge, and you are coming in not knowing anything about the business. Maybe you don't know anything about the business part of it, but design, and the psychology of design, and you have seen this person operate, so you have that empathy. So I think the best thing you can do is be an advocate and align yourself with the people who know the business. For us, it is the product owners, but it might be just like your client. Align yourself with the part of them that wants to advocate for it. I want people to like it. I want people to be moved. I want people to come. Align yourself with that. And sometimes that's an opening for a conversation about what your shared goals are, so that when you offer something that seems maybe slightly off from what they thought, well, I think we didn't think about this group, or I don't know about that audience, how they would respond to that. They're more likely to respect it because you kind of built in some rapport. I do a lot of sideline and offline conversations also, and then coming back to the big group.
Cool. Thank you.
And I'm gonna just say I totally agree with that, Ebony. one of the first things I do anytime I work with any, whether it's a client or within a company, the first thing I want to understand is like, what are their values? You know, what is it you say you're doing? You know, what is it you say you're offering? Like, what is it you say your value is to people? And I kind of keep that in my mind so that every conversation I bring that back to the forefront. You know, so when we start to talk about values and ethics and things that people think are way too ethereal for, oh, we're just business people trying to make some money, nobody cares about that. It's like, well, you said you wanted to create value for people, and this is how we create value for people, by doing these things. So which one do you believe? You know, and so sometimes it becomes a challenge to say, where, you know, you tell me, because I'm gonna, you know, try and think about that. And you know, it's really important to kind of take your, you know, I used to tell my old team, we would fight with people all the time, and I would say, look, be the first team to take your ego out of the room. Be the first people to take your ego out of the room, because most people are going to talk from their ego. They want to win because they have whatever on the line. Like, we don't need to win. Like, I have zero desire to win this conversation. I have a desire to do what's right for someone. And if your idea is better, great. You just saved me a whole bunch of time. You made me look good in the process. But let's figure out how we make this right. And I think that sometimes there's a power to kind of, you know, pulling yourself out of it and understanding what are the higher elements of the goals, and then how you bring those continually throughout every piece of work that you do moving forward.
Thank you, Joy. Are there other suggestions around how to, again, go past, right? Create that, and the next thing, right? I think that's what Keith was bringing up, what you've brought up. I have something to share, but I'm wondering, Brooke, do you have comments, or obviously anyone else in our digital going back to the third space of virtuality? Other comments? I'll just share with everyone. I recently at Stevenson, since the pandemic, right, we've done a deep dive around realizing DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a important value, and an institutional kind of reorientation that's going on. And so NCBI, which I cannot tell you what those acronyms is, but it's basically, it's a safe third space where we encounter as a group diversity, equity, inclusion. Of course, everyone is in the pool. So anyway, 6-hour training, really quite phenomenal. And at the end of the event, I'm not a facilitator. Anyway, one of my partners during the day walks up to me, goes, man, I thought this was going to be about, focusing on minorities. And I turned to him, I said, well, we all are them. Each one of us is a minority, right? We're all in the pool together. And of course, his comment to himself and to me resonated with how impactful the whole day was, right? And Joe, you just shook your head, right? We are all in this together. It's the truth, right? And that we can't forget that, really. Ebony, I just want you to know it's 7:57, and we probably should be wrapping this up. Final comments. Keith, could you comment on Joe's article and why you made a comment to that?
Oh yeah, he posted in the chat. I think the one that resonated with me was mirroring the company, mirroring the values of the things that they produce. So if you're going to say as a company you continuously improve, then definitely living that out in the work, in the teams and the products that are coming out of that. So I love that article, and it's got a lot more gems in there.
Cool, that's great. Thank you so much.
And I just
so go ahead, Ebony. Yep.
Oh, I was just going to add in the end, so like summing it all up in a way, like find your unique voice, the thing that is a strong point for you. You may not want to advocate for it like Joe demonstrated, but you can find a way to create. I think Joe and Keith created a vocabulary list for equity that they put up on their company website as an example. So doing things like that, even small things to plant seeds, really makes a difference. And then make sure that you kind of hone your voice and move from proving to purpose, which in this case is disruption, making room for yourself, belongingness for yourself.
Thank you so much. Carol's just posting. So we're wrapping this up. Raquel, anything else we want to say? Actually, I can say it actually. Next month's talk is Brian Keynes will be discussing, I'm going to pull this up right now. It's on July 12th. Just give me a minute, everyone. Woo. And oh my goodness, just give me a second. It's booting up here. The conversation will be the offset image, object, margin, line, data, fluxes, pop. So Brian Kane, an artist, educator, will be discussing exemplars around and discussing what art and design is in times of political, social, and aesthetic malaise. So that is next month's conversation, and it will be at July 12th at 7 p.m. Good. Raquel, do you want to add anything else?
Yes, I want to thank you all, the attendees, for joining us, and thank Ebony, Nicole, Keith, and Joe, and Lori for moderating this conversation. I feel like this is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot to talk about this topic. So, you know, maybe we can continue this conversation in other events or other formats. I think I'm really glad we had you here. And I also want to invite you all for June 30th. We're back with the Latino Design History series. And we are having Maria Gonzalez de Cosillo. She's a Mexican information design researcher. She's going to be talking about Mexican railways. She's going to be telling the story about how Mexican railways were implemented in the 19th century using maps, charts, and other objects. Really interesting presentation. She's going to be giving the talk in Spanish. We're going to have interpretation in English and Portuguese. And so Maria is going to be in Spain. And we're going to have in this online event also with Garreyes, who's a Baltimore-based artist with the roots in Mexico. He's going to be joining the Q&A and giving his input about the topic and bringing his perspective on migration and displacement. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. I hope you can join us.
Raquel, I'm so sorry I forgot that.
No problem, no problem.
I was just thinking ahead to next month. Okay.
Yes.
Good. So thank you, Raquel. Thank you, everyone. Right. Thank you, Ebony. Really quite beautiful. Ebony is giving a talk on this subject in a conference out of California, which is very exciting. And Ebony was featured in an exhibition at Stevenson University last fall of 2021 around creative research design practices. So she shared her safe third spaces content there. So we really appreciate that. So please stay, don't lose touch with us. Please stay engaged with our content, and good night, everyone. It's very helpful. Thank you, Raquel.
Thank you.